Hello. In this video, we're going to be talking about and analyzing GDP. This video is brought to you by a group of University of Calgary students. My name is Justin Law, and I will be the one talking over our presentation. In my group was Luca Domingo, Osama Nabi, Timothy Anderson, and Zoheb Karmali. To give you guys some background as to why we decided to go about this topic, we are all students looking to hopefully find a job after we graduate. And so, at one point or another, we're going to be taking a look at the current state of the job market. The state of the job market is affected greatly by the state of the economy. So, if the economy is doing well, chances are there are more opportunities for us to pursue in the job market, and vice versa. So, the main question we were trying to solve and frame our analysis around was when we compare both the Canadian and American economies, why are there such differences between the two? And to what extent are these differences in the economy? And so, one of the most important indicator of a country's economy is the country's GDP. So we decided to take a look at the historical GDP of Canada and the United States. But before we talk about the GDP, I want to discuss a bit about how we found the data for our analysis. With gathering the data, we took a four-step approach to collecting the information. These four steps are finding the data from the International Monetary Fund's database, scraping the raw data into RStudio, cleaning up the data, and beginning to analyze the information. With the data, we're able to start the analysis and make interesting graphs to answer our questions. So with our first graph, it shows the buildup of the two economies' GDP over time. Looking at GDP over time, we see that Canada's GDP is substantially lower when compared to the United States GDP. This could be due to a variety of different factors such as unemployment, population, or exports and imports. So that is exactly what we wanted to explore with our project. Exactly what factors affect a country's GDP. After that, we can begin to draw comparisons between both the countries and individually look at which factors affect GDP the most. What factors affect Canada's GDP, what factors affect USA's GDP, and lastly, we will explore what different factors affect a country's GDP. The five factors that we chose to consider in our analysis are the government's lending and borrowing, revenue, expenditure, debt, and their structural balance. For those of you who are not familiar with structural balance, it is revenues minus expenditures minus transitory financial factors such as inflation. It accounts for a more accurate view of the underlying fiscal position of a country. This next graph shows Canada's GDP compared to the five factors we previously stated to be our focus. This includes an interesting feature which is called time lag, where a change in one factor doesn't affect another factor till a later time. For example, the 2008 recession meant Canada had to take on more debt, so the dip in the GDP at a later time is the effect of that. This is USA's GDP compared to the five factors we previously stated to be our focus. Similarly to Canada's GDP over time, USA's GDP has the same time lag effect, but instead with revenue affecting GDP. After seeing the time lag effect for both countries, we decided to run some regression testing to see how these factors actually affect a country's GDP. As you can see with the graph, debt is the most statistically significant variable with regards to GDP, meaning that debt is the best predictor of GDP. Similarly with the USA's regression, revenue is the most statistically significant variable with regards to GDP, meaning that revenue is the best predictor of GDP. But what about the other factors that we mentioned previously? Since debt is the most significant factor when it came to Canada's GDP, we wanted to take a look at the lending and borrowing as well, since that factor should have an effect on the country's debt. So we did some more regression testing and found that revenue and expenditures were the best predictors of Canada's lending and borrowing. Since revenue is the most significant factor when it came to USA's GDP, we wanted to take a look at the structural balance as well, since that factor should have an effect on a country's revenue. So we did some more regression testing and found that revenue and expenditures were the best predictor for USA's structural balance. So to wrap up our project, we determined that debt has the most significant effect on Canada's GDP. We saw that USA's GDP, revenue has the most significant effect on GDP. We explored Canada's lending and borrowing. And finally, we explored USA's structural balance. Thank you for your time.